to another conversation at the table. My name is Chad Bresson. I'm the pastor at the table of Los Fresnos here in Los Fresnos, Texas. Hope you've had a great Wednesday. On Wednesdays here in Los Fresnos, we have our Lamp Bible Study workshops. We do those every Wednesday at noon at Arnie's Wing House. Arnie's Wing House is a fine establishment here in Los Fresnos. We always have some good wings and whatever else they have on their menu at noon. It's always fun to get together and eat lunch and spend the lunch hour talking about God's Word. Typically for our noon lunches on Wednesdays at Arnie's, we're looking at something having to do with the previous sermon from the Sunday before, and that's what we did today earlier at Arnie's. Over the past few Sundays during Lent, we've been looking at the sayings of Jesus from the cross. And this past Sunday, we looked at the last one when Jesus says, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." And that's the last thing that Luke records Jesus saying. It's interesting, the various gospel biographers of Jesus all have him saying different things at the end, and Luke chooses to use what we're pretty sure is the very last thing that Jesus says at the cross or on the cross. And he says, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." Now today we looked at that, and we looked at some of the things that were going on with that during our Bible study, but then the question was asked about one of the things going on in the story. And so we're going to look at that just very, very briefly this evening. We're going to look at something that is actually said about Jesus there at the cross. But this is how Luke records these final moments of Jesus on the cross. Verse 44 in Luke 23 says, "It was about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3, because the sun's light failed." That's an interesting way of putting it. There are reasons he says it that way, by the way. "The curtain of the sanctuary was split down the middle. Jesus called out with a loud voice, 'Father, into your hands I entrust my spirit.' And saying this, he breathed his last." Then verse 47 says, "When the centurion saw what happened, he began to glorify God, saying, 'This man really was righteous.' All the crowds that had gathered for the spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, went home striking their chests. But all who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things." So there's a bunch of things going on here. Again, we're not going to spend all of our time looking at all the different things happening in this very short paragraph about these very last moments of Jesus on the cross. But one thing that we see here is both Jesus crying out with a loud voice, "Into your hands I entrust my spirit." And then immediately following, Jesus says something, and then this centurion says something. Now, this centurion is somebody who has been there. He's been part of the Roman guard, probably part of the execution team that was there at the cross. And they're introduced to us earlier in the chapter. We're going to come back to that in a second. But this centurion is part of those soldiers who were responsible for making sure that the criminals were executed, and that everything going on was supposed to be going on there at that scene. And so he's kind of in charge there. But he sees what happens, and he began to glorify God. So the second statement in this paragraph is, this man really was righteous. And so we see Jesus saying, "Into your hands." We see the centurion saying this man was really righteous. And the question then becomes, why does he say that? That was actually brought up during the Bible study. It's a great question. One of the things we need to see, first of all, is that the centurion in this particular story is representing Gentiles, somebody that's not a Jew. He's also representing Rome, the Roman establishment, the Roman government. And the Roman government has already pretty much condemned Jesus, although we get a sense from Pilate, the Roman governor, earlier in the chapter, that he didn't think that Jesus was guilty of anything. He tried to let Jesus go. And so, and through a series of events, though, he ends up condemning Jesus. Now we get to the backside of Jesus being on the cross and then dying, and we got this Roman centurion saying, Well, he really, in fact, it says he really was righteous. So the first thing we need to see is this is the Roman government and a Gentile saying, you know what? He really was righteous. The second thing we need to see is that this centurion, though, is saying a bit more than just that. It's leading into it. It says, Luke records it this way: when the centurion saw what happened, he began to glorify God, saying, this man really was righteous. Well, now all of a sudden we have something a little more going on. It's not just simply righteous in the sense of, oh, he was innocent of all the things that he claimed to be. No, righteous, it goes beyond saying somebody's innocent. Innocent is basically declaring somebody has not done anything wrong. Righteous is the flip of that. He's done everything right. Righteous is the positive aspect of innocence. So he's glorifying God. He's saying this man really was righteous. He really was a good man. He really did everything right. And I think when you put it in the context of what Luke is doing throughout his entire book, then he's saying that the centurion is now expressing faith. Something that nobody else is doing in this story, except outside of, and we're going to come back to this in a second, outside of that criminal on the cross. But here we have somebody else unexpectedly expressing faith. This really is the Christ. This really is the righteous one. And it's kind of fascinating that Luke picks this out. You know, some of the other gospel writers and gospel biographers, like Mark, they also highlight the centurion. And in Mark, he's saying this is the Son of God. Luke doesn't have that here. Luke is talking about the righteousness of Jesus. So he wants us to see that Jesus is this righteous one in the context of the curtain being torn and the veil inside the temple being rent. And again, we could spend a whole lot of time talking about what that means, but what we're supposed to see is that Jesus is this promised Messiah, the one who did everything right, the one who then dies. It's totally unfair. You know, we get that sense from the centurion. What's happening to Jesus is not fair. It raises the question, so why? What brings him to say this? I think there are clues throughout the entire chapter of Luke 23. For one thing, he sees the exchange between Barabbas. We talked about that last night on a conversation at the table. Barabbas is a criminal, and the criminal goes free. The innocent man, Jesus, is exchanged for Barabbas. The crowd wants it. The crowd says, hey, we want Barabbas. Set Barabbas free. So they set Barabbas free. He's a murderer. And Jesus goes to the cross. He's going the opposite direction. He's innocent. So that centurion has seen that. There's also a conversation about the day of the Lord and all the judgment that's coming. Jesus has a conversation with some women. They're brought up again here. He has some conversations with some women talking about how this is the day of judgment that's been talked about. Jesus is quoting the Old Testament. Then the first thing that Jesus says when he's on the cross is, Father, forgive them. And I guarantee you the centurion has seen all this. And then the second thing that Luke says, that Jesus says on the cross, is, today you're going to be with me in paradise. That's what he says to the criminal who places his faith and trust in Jesus. And now, Father, into your hands I commit or entrust my spirit. You see, all of these things leading the centurion to say that Jesus really is who he said he is, the one he had claimed to be, the righteous one, the one that had been promised in the Old Testament, the one who comes to save, the one who comes to save. And that really is the focus here. When it's all said and done, Jesus dies a horrific death, but he is saving people along the way. We can see his heart when he says, Father, forgive them. But then he says to the criminal, today you're going to be with me in paradise. Jesus is saving people from their sins. He's saving the world. But what Luke wants us to see is that's not just some kind of theology out there, some sort of atonement theology, and there's lots of great things we could say about that. But even in the moment, when Jesus is under this immense pressure, terrible suffering, Jesus is full of love and grace. He's actually saving people on his way out. Are you kidding me? Two of the most unlikely people, the criminal who says and admits that he deserves the death he's dying, and the centurion. And we could probably even add Barabbas in there. We don't know that he had faith in Jesus, but at the very least, he's going free. And Jesus is, he's turning the world upside down here. In fact, the world is coming apart. We see this day of the Lord stuff going on with the darkness and the veil being rent in two, and Jesus' apocalyptic words to the women who are around there saying, hey, there's coming a day, and I think he's talking about the cross even, you're going to wish that the hills would fall on top of you. Quoting the Old Testament, saying the day of the Lord is here. The judgment day that was promised in the Old Testament is here. But you know what? The funny thing is, the day of the Lord is also a day of salvation. And Jesus is doing that. So part of the day of the Lord is Jesus providing salvation in his grace and in his love. And it's all for you, and it's all for me. That's unbelievable grace. That's unstoppable grace. It's unbelievable. That Jesus, he's giving up his last breath, and even in the wake, he's now his spirit, he has fallen asleep. I think that's one of the gospel biographer writes it that way. He's still saving people. The centurion. That's our conversation at the table. I hope that you're enjoying your Holy Week. I hope you're looking forward to Good Friday. I hope you're looking forward to Easter Sunday and your Easter services. Good Friday here in Los Fresnos. In fact, before we get to Good Friday, Maundy Thursday, we will be at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Harlingen for the Living Last Supper. That's always a great event. It's a reenactment of the Last Supper. It's tremendous. I hope you can make it. And then Friday, we're having our Service of Darkness, our Good Friday service at the Community Center beginning at 6 o'clock. And then Sunday, we will celebrate Jesus and his resurrection on Easter Sunday at the Community Center beginning at 10:30. Until then, remember, Jesus absolutely loves you. And you can rest well tonight because he always has you. Have a good